initiate the proposal, it appears that the servant of Khadija who was sent to the Prophet ﷺ, it was that servant's idea to explicitly mention it. And so that servant, her name was Nafisa, she asked Khadija, do you not think that this man would make a perfect husband for you? And Khadija became embarrassed and said, why would he ever marry me? He is such a noble person, and so on and so forth, and I already divorced, and why would he want to marry me? And so Nafisa went to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and said the same thing. Do you not think that Khadija would make such a noble wife for you? And he said, why would she want to marry me? I am just a person who she has hired. I'm her worker. I'm working for her, in the caravan. Why would she want to marry somebody like me? And she is such a rich person and such a high status and whatnot. And so Nafisa realized that there is indeed a possibility. Both of them are blaming on the other. And so then eventually this marriage was arranged. The Prophet ﷺ's uncle came to the family of Khadija and proposed for the hand of Khadija, and they graciously accepted. And so the marriage was performed, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ at this stage was 25 years old. Prophet ﷺ married Khadija at the age of 25. Now here, Khadija, what was the age of Khadija? You see, as we said in a previous episode, there are many classical books of seerah, and most of the people only know of one or two books, but the reality is there are many books. If you look at all of these books, you find that a number of different ages are given. One book mentions she was 40 years old. And this is the commonly held opinion that many people know, that she was 40 years old. However, other books mention that she was around 28 or 29 years old at the time of the marriage. And of the people who mentioned this is Ibn Ishaq himself, the most famous book of Sirah, Sirat Ibn Ishaq. It mentions that Khadija was around 28 or 29 years old at the time of marriage. And if you think about it, this actually makes more sense, because Khadija had 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 children from the Prophet ﷺ. We'll come to the children of the Prophet ﷺ in a future episode. But she had at least 6 children with the Prophet ﷺ. Whereas a woman of 28, 29, it is much more realistic that such a woman has 6 children. And Allah knows best, but it appears that the stronger opinion is that she was around 28, 29 years old, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was 25. And this shows us the importance of modesty, that indeed it was obvious that there was some attraction. And this is something that we have to say very, very bluntly, that feeling an attraction for the opposite gender when you're about to get married, this is natural. But we have to keep that in check and make sure that everything is done in a halal and a permissible manner. And this is exactly what happened with the marriage of the Prophet ﷺ and Khadija, that indeed there was some type of mutual attraction. Khadija did indeed feel that towards the Prophet ﷺ, but there was done in a proper procedure, the perfect and the pure methodology, where no other sin, no sin at all was done. Rather, the parties that were involved were approached to the families, and the families then agreed, and the nikah took place. And this is a beautiful example for us that shows us one of the ways of getting married in Islam. Also, this shows us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose the perfect person for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Indeed, Khadija was one of the most noble of his wives, and Khadija helped the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam like none other of his wives helped him. Khadija spent her own money and her own time, and Khadija comforted and supported the Prophet ﷺ in times of his distress. So much so that even Aisha, many years later, when the Prophet ﷺ married her, Aisha never met Khadija. Many years later, Aisha said, I was never jealous of any woman apart from Khadija, even though I never met her, because of how the Prophet ﷺ mentioned her. He would always mention her with such love and care that Aisha felt jealous of Khadija, even though the two had never met. And there are many, many more blessings of Khadija. Perhaps we will talk about those blessings in a future episode. But what is important to realize is that in this time of the Prophet ﷺ, he had already established his reputation amongst the Quraysh. The Quraysh already respected him. And by a very reasonable age, around 25, his marriage with Khadija was finalized and took place. And Khadija eventually became the mother of all of his children, except for one child by the name of Ibrahim. We will talk about that in a future episode. This brings us to the conclusion of today's episode. Insha'Allah ta'ala, I hope to see you next time. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.